Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Broken Meeple. This is a preview episode. I don't do many of these, however leading up to Essen and quite a few end of year Kickstarters, there's probably going to be a few more of these. Again, I tend to cherry pick the ones that I do, so don't suddenly send me a million emails, okay? But this is for Kingdom Come Deliverance from Boardcubator. This is a Kickstarter that's about to go on any day now, possibly even the day this video gets released in fact. And it's basically a kind of cooperative narrative campaign game. So you take control of these various characters and you go through the different scenarios of a campaign, unfolding a story, doing skill checks, getting items, interacting with NPCs. It's, you know, that kind of RPG-like system. But the interesting thing is that this is based on a computer game series called Kingdom Come Deliverance that I've never played. What? I've been tempted to grab it on Steam sales, but I've always seen mixed reviews about the PC game, and I've never noticed. I didn't know if I was going to enjoy it or not, for reasons that will kind of gel into my feelings with this as well. And I just thought, you know what, when I got invited to demo it, I think last year, Essen, I thought, you know what, let's just go into it completely blind. Not play the video game, let's like not have any of that bias behind me, because you know there's going to be some people who love this video game series and are going to want to know if this measures up to it, or it's going to be something that they get used to, and I thought, no, let's go in totally blind. So we got to play a demo last year, and now I have extensively played through essentially the first or prequel scenario in a sense of the campaign itself, using prototype components in here. So this is nowhere near final components or final app or final rulebook or anything, so I can't really comment too much on that. Apart from one or two aspects though. So in terms of the story and setting, this is where I might need to apologise a little bit, because I've not played the computer game, as I said. So I'm coming into the setting completely blind, and it is based on a proper sort of historical era, the Holy Roman Empire, set in the 1400s essentially. And this is not an area I have a lot of knowledge of. I'm not big on history, I'm not religious, so pretty much everything plot-wise and setting that this game has to offer is completely new to me and goes over my head like that. So if I get any historical facts wrong, I do apologise. But it's not to say that the story is hard to follow. I'm sure a lot of you will follow it pretty easily, but from what I gathered, it's essentially a time where you've got, you know, Catholics versus the Hussites called here, and it seems to be like, you know, two religious factions going at each other's throats. There's some like politics in the background. There's all sorts of, you know, can we trust these people? You know, holy crusades going on. Guards are going around, you know, pillaging and robbing and basically acting like mercenaries. It's a pretty nasty time. You essentially have an inquisitor bloke who's like hired you to look into a situation for him. I don't want to give away too much of the plot. You know, you basically have to go find someone and obtain a certain item of importance, and then the story unfolds. You find out stuff during the scenario, and then eventually you'll end up on a cliffhanger where it's like, right, start the next scenario, except of course I only had one mission in this prototype. You do not play like a magic wizard or anything like that in this game. This is proper historical setting, okay? There is no magic, no dragons, no trolls, no orcs, no goblins, none of that stuff. You are playing basically an inquisitor or a commoner or a maiden. I mean, that is basically who you are. I think in the computer game you play a son of a blacksmith or something. So you're basically playing generic person, okay? Bit like in Tainted Grail, where you play a relatively generic person. Here, it's even more generic. You are essentially the common folk. So you have to realise that also means that you are not a combat munchkin. You know, you are not like going to be fantastic at everything. You're going to need to play this with a much more cautious approach than you would any other kind of RPG or dungeon crawl or adventure game that you've ever played. This world is gritty, it's nasty, and it will hit back hard if you mess around.
The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it.
So you've got a character board. You choose one of the 3 characters that I had. I'm sure there'll be more later. You have stats for strength, agility, perception, and speech. You can get perks. You've got health and stamina. So many actions. This is all sounding relatively normal and what you've heard before, isn't it? But there's a unique thing to this that comes out of Kingdom Come Deliverance, is a suspicion track along the bottom. The idea with this that tries to set itself apart from other games of this ilk is that the characters or the NPCs that you can find have coloured discs to note down their alert status. So a white, somebody in white, you know, for example, this innkeeper here, could literally just be passing by, he's just serving the drinks, whatever, doesn't really have a problem. But then you get this guy who's a mercenary, he's a bit of a nutcase, he's chasing after a woman, you know, and he's alert status red, which is the highest, which basically means that if you so much as look at him funny, he's going to come and try and stab you. And there's yellow and orange for differing levels of alertness, shall we say. Whether it's a guard or some person scared, a little orphan kid, whatever. And this leads to what I think is quite a cool concept, is that, yes, you can go into this, you know, guns blazing, even though there's no guns, but you can go into this with a combat mindset. And I ended up doing so in my first playthrough of this. I didn't think it was going to go that way, but it just happened to go that way. But you can approach this from a non-violent perspective. There's a lot of opportunities to get out of combat, to lure guards away, to distract them, to talk your way out of a situation. Yeah, you can't do it the whole game. At some point you're probably going to have to fight something, but it's not like every time you see a guard you have to kill him. You know, you can let them do their thing. As long as you don't act suspicious around them, they don't tend to pass you any more threat. And the idea is every time you move to locations where these suspicious people are, you roll some suspicion dice, which basically have all the exclamation marks like the Metal Gear Solid thing you might have gone like, which I always call it. Depending on their status, you roll different coloured dice, and you've got a track, and if it matches the symbols, then you get spotted, or they just go, whatever, and pass you by. This is really cool though, because not only does it give an alternate way to play the game that you wouldn't normally be used to, because a lot of these games will focus you on combat from the get-go, but also the events that happen during the game and the way that the people will speak to you is influenced by their suspicion level. If you speak to somebody on high alert, they're going to be jittery, they're going to be thinking about killing you, you know, you're going to be like, oh, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't go near this person. But if they're docile, they're a little bit more receptive to your speech, you know, the dialogue is slightly different, and this creates just an interesting difference to what I've seen in other games. Now, I mentioned about an app. This uses an app, so I did it on my mobile phone, basically. It was off their website, and of course this is a prototype stage app, but honestly, apart from introducing a few things like a back button and a few of these little, like, you know, tweaks that any app should have these days, which I'm sure they will do in the full design process, this app's actually not bad at all. It doesn't have, like, you know, a ton of, you know, picture representation and like flashy effects and stuff. It's not Fantasy Flight here. It's more akin to something maybe like Oathsworn. But the idea is that it goes through the dialogue, gives you the choices, tells you what the skill checks are. It shows the map of kind of like Destinies, if you've played that game from Lucky Duck Games, where you essentially have these tiles on the board. And don't worry, this isn't really spoiling much, but you know, you would have these tiles in a grid system, and so depending where it is on the grid, it will have certain tokens on it, where these tokens here basically represent things like perception checks, speed, you know, speech checks, agility checks, that kind of thing. And the app just tells you to put tokens on various spots in order to represent, oh, that's something you can interact with. As I say, I got a very big Destinies vibe from this game. But with the app itself, it ran pretty smoothly, other than some audio bugs. But again, this is a prototype app, but it had voice acting. Unique voice acting for narration and characters, you know, and it was done pretty well, actually. I was quite impressed at the voice acting in general, not just the fact that it was present, especially at prototype stage, but the fact that it actually sounded pretty good. Goes a little bit slow, so if you are listening to this on the app, you know, it might take a little while to go through a typical speech pattern. They maybe talk a little bit faster, but, you know, minor blemish aside, I was quite impressed, and it does add to the immersion factor. But yeah, they do obviously need to work on this app and, you know, make certain it's got all the different things that an app should have. But again, prototype, I'm sure this is going to be a big focus point. But preliminary thoughts, pretty good so far.
And I'm the bad guy?
But that app generates dynamic events. So you do your action points and you press the app in order to activate dialogue, and then you do a refresh round, which refreshes the whole world. So you reset your stamina, but then so do the NPCs and stuff like that. And then what will happen is even like in the middle of your turn after an action sometimes, or usually in the refresh phase, it will say world event. And then it will say, right, okay, on tile C3, this happens. And then this guy comes back in. And it's like, hang on a minute, we dealt with him earlier in the round and then he ran off. So he's back. Oh, he's back with a vengeance as well. Maybe we should have finished him off at the time, I don't know. And these things happen and they're quite cool. I mean, for the most part, they tend to be like, oh, are there any guards wandering around the board? In which case, they check for alertness and they wander around so they don't just get stuck in the same location. But it is quite cool that a lot of these events happen that you don't expect them to happen. I mean, I had one tile where I basically had like a gap in my exploration thing. So, you know, that corner there where I don't have a tile, that was unexplored. And then I was taking so long in the other areas that eventually something just happened there and it got revealed of its own accord. But that's cool. It meant that it wasn't completely blank just because I went somewhere else. You know, things had to happen to progress the story. But there's definitely a chance for branching paths. I mean, you could go and kill everybody in sight, which I must admit I kind of did. But it opened up different side quests and different main quest things for me to do. You can approach the end of the first scenario in multiple ways, and that's a good thing. If you want to ignore combat entirely, or for the vast majority of it, and rely more on your diplomacy skills and stealth, you can do that. It can work. Now, in terms of leveling up your character, you essentially have perk points that you grab. So on your board, you've got, you know, like treachery, like charisma, warfare, dexterity, intuition, and occasionally that will basically say get a perk point. So you basically just put a token in the respective segment. But then what you do is that for free on your turn, you don't have to wait for a refresh phase or anything, you just do it in between actions. You can spend the perk points to level up your attribute levels or to get perk cards. Now, the attribute dice are kind of a necessity, it must be said. Now, it's not to say that the perk system is bad. You essentially have these little cards and level 1, 2, and 3, and you essentially grab perks which give you special abilities, some bonuses when you do certain actions. They might even unlock certain actions. Like, for example, I couldn't backstab anybody until I grabbed the perk from the agility tree to actually let me backstab. And then my maiden, who was not supposed to be the combat munchkin in the group, ended up going around backstabbing just about everybody she claimed to be like violent in nature. It's like, she needs to sort out her priorities. But yeah, you know, it certainly went down that route. But then you can also learn alchemy and convert like herbs into potions. Not something I was doing in the first level, but it's in the game and there were stuff for it. So it's something that you'll be able to do later on. But the agility dice though, oh my god, the attribute dice, you need these. Because this is one problem I did have. Most games don't make you succeed every skill check you do. But in this game, you don't necessarily have to succeed at every check. It's just the more successes you get, the better outcome. But man, does this game want to remind you that skill checks are hard. Skill checks in this are insanely hard at times. They usually want you to get a lot of successes, but the main problem is the basic dice you use. You always have a pool of 6 dice and you decide which attribute dice you're going to throw in. Sometimes, even though you're doing a speech, well, maybe a bad example, you know, sometimes you may be doing a strength check and you want to roll the red dice for that, but then you might have an item that lets you convert blue dice, the perception dice, into defense. So you might actually be willing to say, you know what, fair enough, I'll throw in a blue die. And then you fill the rest up with white dice and then you roll them and see if you succeed. Except, attribute dice, if you're rolling it for the purpose it's meant to be used for, have a 50-50 chance of getting you a success. Great, attribute dice are great. The white dice have a 1 in 6 chance. 1 in 6, only one face has a success on it. The amount of times, even with rerolls, you do get a basic reroll you can spend stamina for, but even with rerolls, the amount of times that I can roll 5 of these dice and not get a single success multiple times is quite high and a little bit frustrating. Just give us a check, you son of a. As soon as you see a skill check require like 4 or 5 successes, you might as well just assume you're going to fail it, because rolling that many successes just ain't going to happen. XCOM, for crying out loud, at least has a success on 2 sides of the die, so it's 1 in 3, and it's still hard enough to roll successes in XCOM. Here on these white dice, they are garbage dice to roll for attributes. So the quicker that you can spend these perk points to get attribute dice, the better. I dare say, at the moment, I feel that getting more dice for attributes trumps perk cards. It's the way I'm seeing it, and like I say, they can tweak the rules and make this a little bit different in the future, but based on the prototype, that's kind of the way I felt when I was going through the first scenario. As I said, I can't talk much about components, but you have got a lot of custom colored dice. I mean, that's pretty cool in themselves. They're quite small dice, they're not huge, but again, you do get a lot of them, and different colors, different effects. The tokens, I mean, they are acrylic plastic circular tokens, you know, and they've got custom faces on them as well, so I mean, that's pretty good going. Now, cards and artwork, you know, that's subject to change, although the artwork on these tiles is, well, tiles, card, you know, we'll see how that goes in the future, but the artwork on these is decent enough and paints the picture of what's going on, so you never look at the map and feel confused. But I'm actually pretty confident about these miniatures, because these miniatures are pretty good actually. For, you know, they're very different style to what you've seen from, say, Cool Mini or Not or Awakened Realms. They're a lot more of like, they feel more solid, like it's just one figure, you know, more like something that you would get out of a 3D printer. But they've got a lot of detail on them, you can tell the difference between the figures, and all you got to do is just put a different color base on it to show its alert level. And, I mean, for a prototype, to give me miniatures in general, I thought was pretty impressive, but I think that this Kickstarter, you know, when it gets going, is definitely going to make a thing about these miniatures, and rightly so, because I think they are pretty cool. The only thing is, how many miniatures are going to be? I mean, I've got 16 odd miniatures in this box, and I had to use, I think, nearly all of them for the first scenario. So, if you've got multiple scenarios in this game, are they going to rinse repeat the characters, or are you going to have, like, 3 boxes worth of miniatures in order to play through the whole campaign? That's a little concerning, because yes, okay, it would be nice to have a lot of cool miniatures, but that also means it's going to jack up the cost. I'll have to see how that goes.
Shut up and take my money!
Now, I played this solo, so I had 3 characters in here. If you're playing solo, you simply control 2 characters, and that's it. The rules are unchanged. In fact, frankly, why don't you just control 3 characters? There was nothing in the rules that really changed up solo to multiplayer. If you were to play this multiplayer, you would simply just have 1 person, 1 character, and then you discuss with each other, go through the story together, and have that cooperative nature to it. But, much like in Destinies, I did feel like if you're going to do that, you're doing that by choice. Because if you were just a solo player and you intend to just go through this by yourself, it is very easy to pilot 3 characters. You've got the 3 boards, you just keep their inventories separate as you need, and then you just mark their attributes, you handle their items. The main thing that gets a little bit tricky is that you can kind of do your actions in whichever order you kind of feel like. So yes, they have trackers for actions, but you're sort of going, right, well, I'm going to do 2 actions with him, 1 action with her, 2 actions with her. I might save your action for next round actually, which you can do, which is quite cool. So it may get a little fiddly to track action points, but you only get 3 actions around, so it's not terribly difficult. It's not like you've got 10 actions per person and a deck of cards that you've got to manipulate or anything like that. So if you're solo, fine, just use as many characters as you feel like and control them all. You can pretty much do what you feel like.
This is why Superman works alone.
So I've explained a few aspects of how the game plays, and I don't know what the format of the Kickstarter is going to be, so I obviously can't comment on that. But you know me, I give my honest opinion about these. So even though this is not a review of the game, I can only give you my thoughts after playing a prototype, and you can never buy my opinion. But I gotta say, I was pretty chuffed with this. You know, there's a lot of prototypes that I can play, and I go, that's not exactly exciting me and stuff like that, but this one actually has got me very intrigued, because you know, Destinies was a game that I reviewed not particularly highly. I think I gave it like a 5 out of 10. Go check out the review for more details, but I didn't like its competitive nature. I didn't like the fact that it basically just felt like Finders Keepers, where you just run around the board and hope that you get to the end of your plot better. The solo didn't work in it. I hated the time trial thing that it had. There was a lot of problems I had with it. This has similarities to Destinies in how it operates. I mean, you've got the app on the side, you build your map in a grid using square tiles, that's pretty much how Destinies work, and you interact with things on the map and different characters. But where it differentiates in a positive manner to Destiny's is the fact that the story A is a bit more compelling, it's a bit more interesting, especially as it's set in a proper real world setting. But I love the fact that you have multiple ways to approach a scenario and they feel distinct. Like I really can go full combat or full dialogue and actually still do pretty well. The suspicion thing is also unique to this game, and I think that works really well. Having the idea that, you know, characters will interact with you in different ways based on whether they're a bit jittery and on high alert or not. You know, are you being stealthy? Are you doing too many suspicious things nearby? There's just a lot of cool aspects that it brings out that immersion. And the app already has impressed me with the voice acting and how smooth it is to operate, but obviously it's going to need some tweaks, some refining, and certainly the rulebook I think is going to need some refining as time goes on. It's early days though. They've got plenty of time to do this. Just take the advice and feedback on board, you know, see what you can do about those skill checks maybe, definitely get that app refined and perfect, and certainly get yourself a rulebook editor to sort out your rulebook, because you do not want this to have FAQs like crazy when it's all done. You want this to be crystal clear. But honestly, if you're a fan of Kingdom Come Deliverance, I think you're going to have a good time with this. It's not going to be entirely the video game, but I think they're really staying faithful to it from the research I've done. But even if you know nothing about Kingdom Come Deliverance, like me, you come in totally blind, I think there's something here for you if you just want a cool, you know, narrative story game that you can play with friends or by yourself and not have a ton of upkeep and a ton of fiddliness to go by. So, but obviously not necessarily for kids. So those are my preliminary thoughts. They're positive so far, and I'll be intrigued to see how this progresses. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, please remember you can thumb up the video, subscribe to the channel or the Patreon, but most of all, let me know your comments. What are your, what do you know about Kingdom Come Deliverance, the video game or otherwise? Do you know much about this historical setting? Are you like enticed by what I've said about this game? Is there stuff you want to know? By all means, check out the Kickstarter when it goes. There'll be a link in the description for it, because I think I'm embargoed to not release this until it launches anyway, so you'll have all the information at your disposal. And if you want more content on the channel, then by all means check out my top 100 saga that is still going. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about it. It's still going to continue on through September. But also check out some reviews that I've done of some 2-player games. Take care, and remember, as always, regardless of how you want to approach a gritty setting like this, whether it's violence or diplomacy, it's still at the end of the day only a game. Bye for now. Take care.